just to use a very classic analogy, when we think about the transition, the discrete nonlinear phase shift transition from caterpillar to butterfly, it goes through a liminal phase, right, which is the chrysalis. And the caterpillar doesn't just like lose weight and grow wings. The caterpillar actually goes through a very complete dissolution process. And then the amino acids are resequenced by a second set of DNA. Butterfly DNA, caterpillar DNA, two different code bases. And so we can really see that the caterpillar's job was it had a developmental phase where it was basically defined by net growth and consumption unrenewably, gathering the parts necessary to then be reassembled foundationally into a different code that was not about net growth and consumption in the same way. If the caterpillar didn't go through that phase shift, it would eat itself into extinction. So if you plotted those curves, you would say it eats itself into extinction. But of course, as the blood starts getting rich enough to be able to, go into the chrysalis, you start getting the first imaginal cells kicking in, which of course the caterpillar body attacks as foreign invaders, but then they start to proliferate more, triggers the movement into the chrysalis, dissolution of the caterpillar, recoding. So this, and then just to complete that story, the butterfly is actually pollinating the plants that the caterpillar decimated, but across these vast ecosystem spaces that helps the evolution of the whole thing, right? So you get what was net unsustainable, devastating, based on growth and consumption, was actually a developmental phase of something that's helping the evolution of all those systems. So if we think about developmental phases, the 40 weeks of a baby in utero, if it continued, would kill itself and the mom. And the phase shift of leave the birth canal, umbilical cord cut, is not predicted by the 40 weeks before if you didn't know that thing was going to happen, right? The same is true of a chicken inside of an eggshell. So you have all of these discrete phase shifts associated with developmental phases. And I think it's fair to look at humanity as being in a developmental phase defined by net growth and consumption of the technological and scientific and, et cetera, capacities that are necessary. And it was win-lose game theory and capitalism and the military-industrial complex that got us those. But now it self-terminates if you keep it in that phase, just like the caterpillar or the in utero baby. But you can then, and what the interesting thing is, if the baby comes out too early, it dies. But if it stayed in later, it would die. There's a very kind of tuned window where it both has to shift and can, right? It didn't have the capacity to before. All of the developmental phases are defined by that. So the kind of economics that is necessary for a distributed exponential tech world is not Marxism, is not capitalism, is not any version of capitalism, not socialism or fascism. It's fundamentally new shit that we couldn't have even thought of before because we didn't have the tech necessary to mediate it. And so, if you have shitty jobs that nobody really wants to spend their life doing, that a civilization needs, you have to figure out how do you force people to spend a lot of their life doing the shitty job. So you either give everybody, meet everyone's needs as a state, in a communist way, and then the state has to force people to do the shitty job, so it's imperial and we don't like it, or you let the free market force them, which is if they don't do the jobs, they starve. But as soon as technological automation starts replacing the shitty jobs, and it's non-sentient doers of those things, the need for extrinsic control, extrinsic incentive of all the humans goes away, and it's a foundational axiom of every economic theory so far.
You think we're going to get rid of all shitty jobs?
Progressively.
Yeah.
But basically it goes like this. If you can write a process for it, you can automate it. It requires the technology to advance, but anything you can write a process for, you can automate, and without AGI, right? With just automation. And anything you can write a process for, no human wants to spend their whole life doing. It's fun for a little while. You might get kind of zen with it. You might learn something, but ultimately doing things that are discovery and creativity and connection based is where our intrinsic incentive is going to come. And so there happens to be a very nice match here, right, between what our generalist capacity that can write processes and create technology to do those things can do, and what we actually want to do in an intrinsic incentive based civilization, in economy, educational system, etc. So where does the change come from? Like the imaginal cells, there will be initial prototypes that now, we have plenty of eco-villages that are prototyping some things, and it's a part of the curve, right? And it's nice, but they actually don't offer a model for how civilization could change comprehensively. They don't have the ability yet technologically to automate the shitty jobs, to have an Internet of Things that is taking an inventory of the commons and being able to inform a data system that can help the enrichment of the commons, right? It doesn't have those new forms of governance and economics factoring Boolean fields. So they're nice steps, but our ability to actually build prototypes of civilization that have fundamentally new forms of economics and governance and infrastructure, right? Integrated, complex system that have necessary and sufficient criteria for complexity that basically outcompete the current world systems comprehensively, because the increased coherence of those systems makes a lot less resource per capita create higher quality of life output across the entire set of things that we would consider. And so here's the real funny irony, is that the omni win-win system actually outcompetes the win-lose system while obsoleting win-lose dynamics itself. And that is the transcendence of the win-lose phase into the omni win-win phase, because in the win-lose phase you get a fractal win-lose defect process where I'm supposed to cooperate with these guys on my team to compete with the other side, but the competitive mindset has gone such that even though CIA and NSA and FBI are on the same team called the United States, they're all competing with each other. Yeah. And then different departments within are competing with each other, and then different people are, and as a result, you're actually getting fractal decoherence everywhere, which means radical inefficiencies, right? And the best things that could be built won't be, because the IP is separated by separate companies that are competing with each other, so they can't synthesize the knowledge. And because information equals competitive advantage, we hide the information and then intentionally disinform others. So then we live in a world where there's so much disinformation you can't parse signal from noise. That is the decay of this system, fractal decoherence and disinformation, that will make it possible for another system to actually radically outcompete it if it gets coherence down. And coherence actually does mean not win-lose dynamics within that system.